Whether you're a diehard sports fan, a hopeless romantic, or a comedy aficionado, the Xfinity 10G network was made for streaming it all. Worry less about buffering when streaming your favorite shows, movies, or live sports, and enjoy a better way to watch. Xfinity gives you a reliable connection for streaming, plus all the entertainment you love all in one place. Fear not, because now you can finally sit back, relax, and stream your favorite entertainment and sports like never before with the Xfinity 10G network.
This episode of the Duke Basketball Report podcast is sponsored by the distinguished gentlemen of Bird Campbell, PA, your Duke-centric law firm. Lawyers by vocation, but Duke grads by the grace of God. Founders and former Duke roommates Jamie Campbell and Tucker Bird say go Duke or go home. Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode 111 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. It is Monday, March 12th, and we are officially in March Madness. We have a packed show. We're going to dive right in. But before we do, I am your host this week. My name is Donald Wine. I am operating this week from my home in Washington, D.C. My peoples are here with me. First from Atlanta, where I was this weekend, Jason Evans. Jason, sorry we couldn't make the link up work this time around, but it's good to have you on, my friend.
Thank you. It is, I say this every year, it's the best time of year. The month of
really
March
is our Christmas.
The best time of year. I'm so excited. I am ready to pod like crazy.
We're going to pod like crazy, but let me bring in our other man with the plan from Denver, Sam Klein. What's up?
Donald, hello. Jason, hello. I need to read everybody a very important email that I just sent a couple minutes ago to Jason and a number of other DBR people. So I guess I don't know the entire backstory here. I know that Jason is running some kind of amateur gambling event with some other DBR guys, and he looped me in to do a draft order random number generation, which means I ended up on this email thread with him and all these other guys, and the production of this event involves sending a lot of reply all emails, which for anybody who uses email, which I imagine is most people who are capable of listening to a podcast, reply all emails can become very annoying. There are a lot of emails in this thread. So anyway, a few minutes ago, right when I jumped 56, on the call,
I looked. It is 56 total emails you've been copied on so far in the past 3 days.
I've gotten 56 emails, none of which are relevant to anything that, none of which pertain to me. And right when I jumped on the call here for us to start this podcast, just in that moment, another email came into my inbox in this thread that happened to be from Jason. So I thought, man, I'm going to crush it here. So I replied all to the list and I said, quote, Jason, cut this shit out, take me off this email thread, and get online so we can record the damn podcast. So,
I love it.
Right when I sent it, Jason logged onto the call. So thank you for heeding my wishes, even though it hadn't hit your inbox yet. I had hit sent before you popped up in the conference call. So thank you, Jason.
But actually, the cool thing is this type of pool, this tournament pool that we're doing, tells you a lot about what people think about who's going to win the tournament. Because what we're doing is a draft. We have 8 players, and we each draft 8 teams. It's a snake draft, and you get 1 point for every game your team wins. And then there's an amount of money involved, and whoever has the most points will get most of the money, second most points, that kind of thing. So, guys, the draft order has been really interesting. Now, we are all Duke fans, but the very first pick was Virginia. The second pick was Duke, then Villanova, North Carolina, Michigan State. Now, I picked 7th out of 8 people. With the number 7 and then snaking around to the number 10 pick, I got Xavier and Kansas. I got 2 number 1 seeds with the 7th and 10th pick. And I think that tells you a little something about what people feel about Xavier and Kansas's chances of going a long way in this draft. Although everyone seems to think that I've had the best draft so far. But anyway, I think it's really interesting that Duke fans, a bunch of Duke fans, when money was on the line, said they thought Virginia had the best chance to win. And also people just don't think much of Xavier in Kansas. Hey, Donald, have I introduced us to our conversation about the tournament?
Yeah, I think you have. As everybody knows, yesterday, the NCAA tournament bracket was released. We could talk a little bit about the show, but I really don't want to talk about the selection show because I thought it was terrible. Your number one overall seed, the Virginia Cavaliers. Villanova, Xavier, and Kansas drew the other number one seeds. But gentlemen, I want to start with Duke's road first. Duke draws the number 2 seed in the Midwest region and will open up Thursday afternoon in Pittsburgh against the 15th seed Iona Gales. Also in their pod, 7th seed Rhode Island and 10th seed Oklahoma. If they make it through the first weekend, they would advance to Omaha for the Sweet 16. Sam, I'm going to kick it to you first. Talk about Duke's road to the Final Four and what you like, but I want to lead you with this question. Out of all that, what is the most surprising part of Duke's draw?
I think the most surprising thing about Duke's bracket is how sort of predictable it is, because normally the NCAA is gonna throw something weird at you. But Duke's bracket actually makes a lot of sense. There was an interesting thing about how Duke ended up with arguably a more favorable bracket location than UNC, Duke being in the Midwest and UNC getting sent all the way out west, even though their draw might be easier. But at the same time, UNC getting to go to Charlotte and Duke getting bumped off to Pittsburgh. Now, I know that this is actually, either way that worked out was going to be fine for the Blue Devils, because as we've discussed before, the best thing for Duke in the first 2 rounds of the tournament is to not end up in UNC's region. And they avoided that here because they're going to be in Pittsburgh, where I think the most hostile visiting, other fan base is going to be Virginia Tech, who certainly Virginia Tech fans don't like Duke, but I am not as scared of an environment where there are a smattering of Virginia Tech fans among Villanova fans and Duke fans and Alabama fans and all these other programs that don't really have much to do with the Blue Devils. So thank God for that. But I will say for Duke's road, it is very interesting because provided they make it through the first game, and I know Jason has a few more thoughts on Iona, Duke could play Oklahoma in the second round, who has arguably the most interesting player in the country in Trae Young, even though Oklahoma hasn't been good recently. The matchup between Trae Young and Duke will obviously garner a lot of attention. If they win that game, presumably Michigan State looms in the Sweet 16. Obviously, this is a rematch of the Champions Classic game from back in November that I attended. And then if they make it to the Elite Eight, Kansas, who was also at the Champions Classic, who also has a lot of the same program weight that Duke has, is waiting for them. The good thing for the Blue Devils, if they do make it that far and do get to play Kansas, is that Kansas big man Udoka Azubuike has been limited by an injury since last week. So he's had a ligament in his left knee that has been causing him some pain. He says the Kansas program is saying that he's going to play this weekend and he should be fine for the tournament, but that will be an interesting thing to watch. So I would say the most surprising thing is sort of the lack of surprising things in Duke's bracket, because we always talk about how the committee doesn't try to make interesting matchups here, but clearly there are some interesting ones in this bracket. I'm surprised that so many of them lined up the way that they potentially do for Duke. But overall, I don't think we're unhappy as Duke fans with this draw. There are tough teams in it. Michigan State, I think, being the real standout among all 3 seeds. I think they maybe had the best resume. So that's a tough game for Duke, but it's a good challenge. I don't think Duke got thrown any teams that really were like underseeded. There are some other points in the bracket, and we'll get to those, where I think some teams really did potentially get hosed with high seeds having to play lower seeds that are at some kind of advantage. So I want to give it over to Jason, though, because I think that he's got more to say about that first round matchup against Iona, with the blanket warning, of course, to Duke fans. We know that 2 seeds, Duke as a 2 seed against a 15 seed is not a guaranteed win. So I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time on the Gales. So Jason, what do you know about Iona? I know that you've gotten to look at them last night and a little bit today.
So I've got a lot to say about Iona. I have looked at them, and you're correct that a 2 versus 15 does not shape up as a match that's going to be super competitive. And let's be honest, Las Vegas has as any point favorite in this game. One of the difficult things I think when you're facing a team like Iona is comparing that, a small conference team. It's comparing them to the kind of opponents that Duke has played throughout the rest of the year. It's really hard to gauge some of these teams that, Iona basically, they only played two teams that are major conference teams that are at all even remotely similar to Duke. They played Syracuse and they played St. John's, two teams that Duke also played. And they lost to Syracuse by 9. They lost to St. John's by 10. So they were reasonably competitive in both those games. But let's be honest, even though St. John's pulled off a wonderful upset over Duke, Syracuse and St. John's aren't the quality of Duke. St. John's didn't even make the tournament. Syracuse is one of the last teams in, and here's Duke as one of the top, 6 teams in the tournament. So the only thing we have to go on from Iona in terms of how they perform against this caliber of team is about a 10-point loss to teams that are worse than Duke. Not a lot worse, but are worse. So to tell you a little bit more about Iona, they play at a really fast pace. They like to push the tempo. They're a pretty good offensive team. Ken Pomeroy rates them the 80th best offensive team in the country, but they are terrible on defense. This is a really bad defensive team. And if defense wins championships, these guys don't believe in that because they don't play D at all. Pomeroy rates them the 212th best defensive team in the country. And look, these guys, they lost games to Siena, to Coastal Carolina, to Monmouth, to Niagara, and to Fairfield. Do you know what that motley crew has in common? Those 5 teams are all among the bottom half of all teams in Division I. At Duke, we flip out when we lose a game to a team that's 70th or 80th best in the country. Well, Iona made a habit out of losing to teams that were the 180th, 250th best team in the country. That's really bad. That
Jason
said,
yeah. Oh, sorry. Continue the thought, and then I have a question to follow it.
I was going to say, that said, these guys do know what they're doing. They won't be overwhelmed by being in the dance. They have now made the tournament 3 years in a row. And let me tell you, that is not easy to do from a small conference like the MAC that they're in. 2 years ago, they lost to Oregon by 16. Last year they lost to Oregon by 16. 2 years ago, they lost to Iowa State by 13. Now, 16 and 13, it's not like they were blown out. It's not like they were destroyed. And then we have those Syracuse and St. John's games from this year where they were 10 points. So, I look at the Vegas line of 20 points and I go, you know what? I think Iona might be 20 points. That might be a decent bet. But the big problem they're going to have is rebounding. It's size. Iona's front line is only like 6'6", 6'7", 6'8". That's the biggest guys they're playing are in that kind of range. And as you know, Duke has guards that are that size. And Iona is a really bad rebounding team. They are 286th in the country in defensive rebounding. 286th in defensive rebounding. That says to me that Duke is going to own the offensive boards. You're going to see Wendell Carter and Marvin Bagley and Marquise Bolden and Javin DeLaurier offensive rebounding. In terms of what Iona can hope to succeed at, they shoot a lot of threes. About 40% of the shots they take are three-pointers. They have 5 different guys who've attempted more than 130 threes on the season. So they hoisted up a lot. They hit about 38% of their threes, which is, pretty good. But Duke's zone defense lately, Duke has improved so much on defense. And one of the big improvements we've made is that the length we have on that zone D allows us to really contest three-point shots. No one has shot well from 3 against Duke. The way to beat the Duke defense is to get in the middle of that zone and get short jumpers and stuff like that, or pass in on the interior and get close to the basket shots. It's not shooting over that zone. And yet that's the kind of thing Iona is going to do. So I've given you, I could mention the specific guys. That their best player is a guy named Ricky McGill. He's their leading scorer. He's their third leading rebounder. He's their leading assist guy. Ricky McGill, everything runs through Ricky McGill. But the reality is what you need to know about Iona is they're going to try and shoot a lot of threes. That shouldn't work very well against Duke. And they are lousy on the boards. And that is Duke's strong point. So I think they set up as a team. They're sort of perfectly suited Their weaknesses play into Duke's strengths. Their strengths play into Duke's strengths. I feel really good about this matchup.
I think it sounds like Duke is going to be extending that zone pretty far. We saw a little bit of that against Carolina and some of the other recent games where when Duke knows that the other team has shooters, they're happy to bring one or even two of the guys who are in the forward positions in the zone up to contest, the corner threes or the one sort of at the top of the key a little bit better. So maybe look for that against Iona if they are really just relying on the 3-point shot, especially because if they're not that big, Duke can leave one big man, say Wendell Carter or Marquise Bolden, down low to collect all of the defensive rebounds. And then, on the offensive end, it sounds like, Jason, that the big men are gonna be able to hopefully have their way with the Gales front line. Do you expect? And I don't know if this is even a fair question for you. Do you expect Duke's big men to have a bigger offensive day, or do you expect the shooters to be for Duke, like say Gary Trent or Grayson Allen, to have more success because the Gales are going to be so focused on Duke down low and trying to overcome that limitation? Who do you think on Duke is going to have sort of the best offensive performance and luck, I guess, against the Gales?
I mean, I think it'll be the big men, just because I agree that Iona is likely to pack it in a little bit, that they're likely to say, okay, let's see if Trent and Allen can beat us from the perimeter. That's probably their only hope, that Duke shoots over them a lot and doesn't hit shots.
Or that Duke maybe turns it over a lot, right?
Yeah, potentially. Although Iona is not a team that is really great at getting steals and great at forcing teams into turnovers. But I think that even if Duke is shooting over Iona to some extent, our rebounding advantage is so big on them. When I looked it up and I saw that they were 286th in the country, there are only 350 teams. They're in the bottom third of all teams in the country at defensive rebounding. And Duke's, I think, we're the number 2 offensive rebounding team in the country. I mean, come on. It's just, it doesn't matter what they do. Our big men are going to get the ball down low, and they're probably going to be really successful. I will be a little surprised if Duke doesn't have 8 to 10 slam dunks in this game.
I like that. I like slam dunks.
I love dunks. Gentlemen, we've talked about the Duke draw a little bit. I want to kind of expand and look at the bracket as a whole. I want to start with this little nugget. I don't know if you guys saw the selection show yesterday, but there was a really cool moment when the only cool thing about the format that they did, if you guys out there did not see it, what they did was they first announced all the teams that had made the tournament in alphabetical order, and then announced the bracket of where everybody was going. A lot of people trashed this. I thought it was terrible. We're the type of people who say, give me the bracket, give it to me now. That's what we want. We don't really care in alphabetical order what these teams are. But there was a cool moment.
Danny Hurley. You're going to talk about Danny Hurley, aren't you?
I'm talking about Danny Hurley. Danny Hurley.
What a great moment. The
coach of Rhode Island. They were announcing the teams in alphabetical order, and they announced Arizona State, which is coached by Bobby Hurley. Dan Hurley literally shrieked. He flipped out and was obviously so happy for his brother and his brother's program for sneaking in. They got into the first 4, so they have to do a play-in game this week. But I thought it was a really cool moment.
Wait. Do you know why Danny Hurley was so freaked out about Arizona State making the tournament?
Oh, because they probably shouldn't have.
No. There's an even better reason. Because Rhode Island, who was safely in the tournament, was playing Davidson for the championship of the Atlantic 10. And everyone just assumed Rhode Island was going to win. And they got upset. They got upset by Davidson. And as a result, someone on the bubble had the bubble burst for them. That Davidson made the tournament. Davidson was not going to make the tournament if they didn't win that game. They're a 12 seed. They would not have made the tournament if they hadn't beaten Rhode Island. So, and this happened on Sunday afternoon. So when Rhode Island lost that game, there were a lot of people who were saying, oh my God, Danny Hurley's team losing may have just boosted or booted, I should say, Bobby Hurley's team from the tournament. I am certain that Danny Hurley was thinking to himself, oh my gosh, I may have just cost my brother a shot at the tournament. And so when he saw that Arizona State made it, the relief, I mean, he shrieks, but then he sort of doubles over, and you can see he looked like he was probably crying tears of joy because he thought he might have cost his brother a spot in the tournament. You know who he actually cost a spot in the tournament? Notre Dame.
Tennessee State.
No, Notre Dame. They said Notre Dame was the next team, and Notre Dame didn't make the tournament because Rhode Island lost to Davidson.
Also, I kind of like coupled in that reaction, Danny Hurley's players are kind of looking at him like, why is this man flipping out on national TV? He hasn't called a name yet. So they're all, you could see how they were at first very confused about why he was flipping out. And then they realized, what team they had just called. And you could see a lot of the players were happy for Bobby Hurley and Arizona State. But it's funny, they are paired in the same kind of region and they could meet in the Sweet 16. Now, it's highly unlikely because that would mean that Duke has to lose along the way. And obviously we do not want that. But I thought that was a really cool moment. But also the one thing I want to talk about with regards to this bracket, I think the one thing that we find out on Selection Sunday every year is that all the little details that we're focused on in the last couple of weeks of the regular season with regards to bracketology and looking at Jerry Palm and Lenardi and all these guys and what they're predicting is that in the end, we are just as good at predicting this as they are. And we should probably have their jobs because even as late as 4:00, I was looking online and seeing that we were supposed to be placed. It was basically the general consensus was we were going to be placed in Nashville or Charlotte, depending on who won the Duke UNC game on Friday night. So as late as 4:00, my friend who works in the ticket office for the Bridgestone Center said that Duke was coming to Nashville. So I don't know what happened in the 2 hours after that, but it just shows you that like even as late as that, you had people who were being told that Duke was going to Nashville and we end up in Pittsburgh. So I thought it wasn't surprising to end up in Pittsburgh, but it was surprising at how late these kind of twists and angles go. And it's all because anyone can really say what they want, but when it gets down to it, no one knows except for those guys in that room making these selections. And when they are released to the world, we really don't know what's going on. But I thought it was a pretty good draw. There's a couple teams in here that are interesting. There's a couple of regions that are interesting, but I want to get your take on it. Jason, what region do you think or what team do you think has the easiest cakewalk to San Antonio?
I mean, there are no easy cakewalks, I don't think. I really like Villanova's draw. I don't see a lot of teams in that draw that are going to give them a lot of trouble. And I think that in Purdue, they got the weakest of the two seeds. I think it sets up really nicely for Villanova to make it back. But I mean, there's no such thing as an easy draw. The South and the Midwest to me are the two toughest brackets. I think, Virginia is a great team and I'm jumping ahead. I'm going to be picking Virginia to make the Final Four, but that is a really difficult bracket, and there are a lot of teams in there that could give Virginia a lot of trouble. The Kentucky-Arizona game, Virginia's going to have to play either Kentucky or Arizona in the Sweet 16. Oh my gosh, both those teams. Kentucky just won the SEC really impressively. Arizona just won the Pac-12 really impressively. Arizona looks like a different team. Versus how they looked about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's almost like, the whole FBI thing came down on them like a ton of bricks and they shrugged it off and said, no, we are men and we are going out there and beating the crap out of teams because that's what Arizona's been doing since it happened. And I feel sorry for Virginia to be the number 1 overall seed and get Kentucky and Arizona as their 4 and 5 seeds. Look at the other 4 and 5 seeds. Wichita State and West Virginia are what Villanova has. I'm sorry, Kentucky and Arizona, way, way better than that.
Hold on, Jason.
Auburn,
I do want to contend that because both Wichita and West Virginia are experienced and talented. And I think that you are underselling the ability of either of those teams to knock off Villanova. Even though I would say, especially West Virginia, given that that games in Boston will not be a noticeable home court advantage for Villanova if they're playing West Virginia. The fan bases are both located, a lot of them in the Northeast, and we know that Wichita has a really great coach and often is competitive in the tournament. I think you're underselling that Villanova might have a hard first, couple games in the tournament, aside from their opening round game, but they have to play potentially Colin Sexton in the second game, and then a West Virginia team that is capable of taking down good teams in potentially in the Sweet 16. However,
look, I want to be clear. I'm not saying. Look, all the 4 and 5s are good. They're good teams. I'm just saying I think that Arizona and Kentucky are a step ahead of the other 4 and 5 seeds, and I think Virginia got hosed a little bit. In terms of having a really tough Sweet 16 matchup.
I will say in Virginia's area, I do agree with that. They do only have to play one of Arizona or Kentucky. It would be especially annoying, I think, for them if that team ends up being Kentucky, because the game would be in Atlanta in your backyard, and Kentucky fans travel. You know how well Kentucky fans travel. I don't know if there will be so many Kentucky fans that it'll be like Rupp Arena in Boise, but I guarantee you, if they make it to the Sweet 16, the Virginia-Kentucky game will be overwhelmingly Big Blue Nation. So that would be really tough. For Arizona, it's a little bit less so, because that's really far for their fan base to travel, and it means they'd have to deal with that time change. Although Kentucky's going to have to deal with that in the first weekend in Boise. But yeah, if it comes to that would be a tough draw for Virginia. I totally agree with you. It's nice that they only have to play one of those teams, not both of them.
Okay, guys, we have a couple. I have a couple. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we haven't talked at all about the West. We haven't mentioned Carolina's bracket one bit.
Oh, you mean Carolina's super easy bracket?
When I asked you who had the cakewalk to San Antonio, I was thinking you were going to lead with the West, but apparently you didn't.
Well, I'm not, because I don't think Carolina's making the Final Four. So are we about to do Final Four picks? Is that where we are?
We're going to get to that quickly. We're going to get to that in a minute. I want to
talk about the West.
Go ahead, talk about the West.
Sure. So Xavier is the number 1 seed in the West. I think everybody knows that Xavier was right there in contention for the 1 seed. They ended up with, I think, the last number 1 seed, and so they have and as a reward they get to go to Los Angeles for their Sweet 16 and Elite 8 matchups if they make it that far, to then potentially play Carolina, who also has to play Michigan potentially in the Sweet 16. It's a lot of teams who have to travel a really far distance. The one team that is out west that I think is really competitive and obviously has the pedigree for making the Final Four is Gonzaga. And Gonzaga will have to contend with Xavier in the Sweet 16 potentially, but you could see a rematch. And Jason, maybe this is where you're going. I think that there are a couple places for Carolina to stumble. The first, like the most prominent of which, is having to play Gonzaga potentially in the Elite 8, because it's a rematch of last year's national championship game. Gonzaga obviously looking for a little revenge factor there. I, though, would not discount the Donald's Michigan Wolverines, who just had a really stellar run through the Big Ten tournament, and that's going to have to be their Sweet 16. Yeah, tell me about Michigan, Jason.
Michigan is playing really well right now. They just won the Big Ten. They seem to be they have a really good combination of inside outside kind of game. I know Donald follows them more than I do, but they feel like a team that's peaking at the right time of year. I'm a little surprised they got all the way up to a number 3 seed. I thought they might be a 4. If they'd been a 4, they probably would have been the best of the 4s. So making them a 3 certainly, sounds good to me. But I think Michigan's the team that's going to come out of that bracket.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because we were going to get into that. But I have a quick question, and you just got to give me a quick answer for both of you. The question is, who do you think is your sleeper pick to make the Sweet 16? We're not talking Final Four yet. Sweet 16, give me a sleeper pick. Sam.
I've got 2 of them that I wrote down. The first being New Mexico State, who has to go through, I would say, underwhelming Clemson and Auburn teams potentially. That would be like the chalk way for them through. So New Mexico State being one of them. And then the other one to look out for is Missouri, who got Michael Porter Jr. back for 1 game in the SEC tournament. They have to beat Florida State in their opening round game. We know that Florida State has been kind of up and down this year in the ACC. And then Missouri gets a shot at the worst number 1 seed in Xavier in the round of 32. So we didn't really get a sense, I think, for how good Michael Porter could be. He only played okay, I guess, in his one SEC tournament game before Missouri lost. But him being back on the court for them is kind of like the way we've talked about Bonzie Colson for so many weeks, where we're wondering if Notre Dame is going to get him back. Ultimately, they probably didn't get him back early enough to make a difference for getting into the tournament. Missouri is not really in that situation because they made it in. And so Michael Porter, any minute now, could turn into presumed top 5 pick Michael Porter that we expected him to be a year ago coming into this class. He was right up there with Marvin Bagley and DeAndre Ayton as like the stars of the high school class of 2017. So I would look for Michael Porter and Missouri to be an interesting Sweet 16 pick to beat Xavier.
I think that the team you mentioned, Missouri, and I agree. Missouri is sort of is one of the teams that I've definitely got my eye on that I think has a really good chance of making waves in this tournament. I think Florida State will be relatively easy for Missouri. I think Florida State is not playing good basketball right now, and they definitely have a chance against Xavier. But the other team I want to highlight is Nevada. They have Texas first. Texas is playing pretty good, but I like Nevada's chance against Texas. And then they presumably will face Cincinnati, and I really like their chances against Cincinnati. Cincinnati is a very experienced and very good defensive team, but this Nevada club, I think I forget if I've mentioned them here, if I've mentioned them to friends or whatever it may be, but the two of the best players on Nevada are Caleb and Cody Martin, who played for NC State a couple of years ago. They are transfers. The Nevada Wolfpack is full of guys who are transfers, and transfers from major college programs, from big conferences, from places like the ACC and the Big Ten. And so you think of Nevada and you go, oh, Mountain West, small-time team, but it's a team full of guys who've played on a big stage at a big major level. And they're all, because they're transfers, they're a year older than you would expect. They're all like 22, 23, 24 years old. I really like the Nevada Wolfpack to make some waves out of the South. And I definitely think they have a chance to make the Sweet 16. Donald, who's your sleeper?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Nevada because my sleeper is Texas. I think they've been playing pretty well right now, and never underestimate a team that's playing for someone else or for something else. They are playing for their teammate who is sidetracked. He has leukemia, so they've been playing with him all year. And this sort of angle in the tournament, you got Mo Bamba, who is by all accounts one of the better top big men in the country as a freshman. And if you're playing for something bigger than yourself, that can carry you a long way. And I think they have the tools. They have the 3-point shooting, if it's on, to beat Nevada and to beat Cincinnati and make it to the Sweet 16. So that's the team that I was going with. So, Jason, one of us is going to be right and one of us is going to be wrong.
Except that I think that neither of those teams is getting by a Cincinnati squad that if Virginia was not so epically the greatest defensive team of all time, we'd be talking about way more, because Cincinnati locks down on defense, not exactly to the degree that UVA does, but to some of that degree. They play, in an arguably power conference in, like sort of just below the Power Five, and they don't lose. They don't lose to bad teams or teams that are sort of ranked below them. They've lost a few games to good teams, but I think that Cincinnati actually is going to beat whichever of Texas and Nevada comes out of what should be a very good first round 7-10 game. But so there we go. There's stuff we're disagreeing with, and I actually take it from some context clues that you guys have dropped that our Final Fours are going to have a fair amount of overlap.
Wait, hang on, Sam. We did talk for 5 minutes about how Nevada or Texas was going to get the Sweet 16. You just trashed it in like 30 seconds, man. How you can do that?
I'm just listen. This is what I know.
Okay, gentlemen. Moment of truth. It is time for us to make our Final Four picks. And for the world out there, for these picks, we reserve the right to change our minds after this recording, and we certainly reserve the right to be wrong. So, Jason, you go first.
So I'm going to lead this off by telling you guys some statistics because, hey, I'm Mr. Stats. Did you know that number one seeds since 1985, when the field expanded to 64 teams, number one seeds have made the Final Four 40% of the time, 40.9% of the time. Number two seeds make the Final Four 21% of the time. So if you're picking something other than a 1 or a 2, You're going out on the limb a little bit. 3s and 4s make it about 7 or 8% of the time. And after that, no one makes it more than about 3%. So the number 1s and the number 2s should, everyone likes to go, oh, I'm picking this long shot. Guys, I got news for you. The number 1s and the number 2s are the teams that always make the Final Four. So from the South, I think Virginia is going. From the East, I think Villanova is going. From the Midwest, I'm taking my Duke Blue Devils. So that's 2 1s and a 2. And then from the West, I'm taking Michigan, 1-3, 2 1s, a 2, and a 3. It may sound like chalk. It may sound boring, but I got Virginia, Villanova, Duke, and Michigan.
Sam, before I get to you, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that I have the exact same Final Four pick.
I love it.
Thanks for looking at my notes, Jason. Sam, what do you got? Is it different?
Well, almost as I feared. I have 3 of the same picks that you guys do.
Virginia, Villanova, and Duke, right? You got Virginia, Villanova, and Duke.
No, I don't have Villanova. So I've got Duke, Virginia, and Michigan. And I was talking earlier, I previewed this a bit. I was talking earlier about how Villanova could have some rough games in the first couple weeks. And I see Wichita State breaking back into the Final Four and upsetting Villanova. So that's going to be my one.
That's a great pick.
That's going to be my one pretty weird one. I know that Wichita has moved up in conference affiliation this year, which has forced them to go on the road to the East Coast a lot. They are comfortable doing it now, and I see them. It's going to be a really tough 2-game stretch for them, having to beat West Virginia and then having to beat Villanova. But I think they can do it. I think they can take out Purdue. I see Wichita State going to the Final Four, and I will take my Final Four picks and use them as an opportunity to ask you guys. So I posed a question to you earlier that I wanted you to think about, and I'm going to, I guess, introduce it here. Now that you see the whole bracket, and we've made our Final Four picks, and we all think that Duke is going to the Final Four, and knowing about Duke's expectations at the beginning of the season, coming in as like the top-ranked team, they have Marvin Bagley, they have Wendell Carter, they have senior Grayson Allen, all these things. Duke was expected to do great things. Now that we see the bracket, how far do you think Duke needs to make it this year to have the season be considered a success for the program? And I want, before you answer the question, to kind of look back at the last 3 years, the 3 years that we have done the podcast, and point out that I would say, and I think you guys would agree with me, that in 2 of those 3 years, Duke had what we would consider successful seasons. Obviously, they won the championship in 2015. In 2016, they lost to Oregon in the Sweet 16, but that was sort of according to seed. That team was often undermanned and was really playing like in over their heads for a lot of the season. So I think that Duke fans aren't really bummed out about 2016. 2017, I think we all agree was a failure because they lost in the second round as a 2 seed to a 7, even though that South Carolina team made the Final Four. I think a lot of folks expected Duke to go farther with Jason Tatum and Harry Giles and junior Grayson Allen coming off an All-American season. So knowing that Duke has been successful, I would say, 2 of the last 3 seasons, I'll give it to Donald first. How far does Duke need to go for this to have been a successful season for the Blue Devils?
So I guarantee you my answer is going to get a lot of shockwaves. But honestly, I think making the Sweet 16 is a success. When you look at the history of programs and how many teams make a Sweet 16 and consider that a success. I think with this team, I think with this bracket, and of course, I'm picking us to go all the way. But if we get to the Sweet 16, after that, in my opinion, you're playing with house money. You want to get to, if you're getting to the Final Four, the best team every year is the team that gets hot in March and is hot at the right time. It's about timing. There's a lot of things that have to fall into place. Sometimes you have a little luck, and you can't always have that every year. But I think getting to the Sweet 16 is a step that we can say, hey, look, as a program, we haven't taken a step back. That with, this heralded lineup that we've been talking about all year, that these guys had some success. And I think, getting to the Sweet 16 for me would be a success. I know for some people we'd probably want to get further, but I think, when you're looking at this, only 16 teams get to say that they made the Sweet 16. If we're one of them, I think we're in great shape.
Jason, do you have an answer that is more aggressive than Donald's?
I hate to disagree with you. Let me, before I answer, I do want to say that I hate this notion of success. What would it take to have a successful season? We're in a one and done tournament. It's the most random way of picking a champion of any big sporting event that there is, because results are so random. It's not like the NFL where the best teams tend to beat, the better team tends to win a football game more than the better team tends to win a basketball game. Because there's such a variation of, we were hot, or we were cold, or whatever else it may be. So I don't want to talk about it in terms of what would be a successful season for these guys. They won the PK 80 earlier this year in incredibly dramatic fashion. There are a number of games we had this season where I just took such joy watching the game and enjoying watching these kids play basketball at a high level. Look, when Marvin Bagley went down, the way some other guys stepped up, the second game against Carolina, that second half comeback, there are tons of moments. The final few minutes against Miami when we made that big so terribly for a little while. Sam, you brought up Zombie Duke earlier this year, and just that brings a smile to my face thinking about the Zombie Duke team that dominates games and just destroys teams. So, they could lose to Iona, and there were still wonderful, wonderful moments this season that I enjoyed. All that said, these guys need to make the Final Four. They're that good. Marvin Bagley is the best freshman to ever put on a Duke uniform. I'm going to talk more about that later, but he's the best freshman to ever put on a Duke uniform. Wendell Carter, if not for Marvin Bagley, would be among the top 2 or 3 big men in Duke freshman history. This is a great team. This is a team that was ranked number 1 for a reason. I look at our bracket. There's no one in this bracket that Duke doesn't beat 65, 70% of the time. Does that mean we're going to make the Final Four? I don't know. But if we don't make the Final Four, I'll be a little bit disappointed because I think we had the talent to get there. Sam, what do you think?
I agree with you, and I am surprised that Donald. I like Donald's answer. I'm surprised that it was that low. I think that given the talent of this team and given the way that we have seen them play when they are at their peak, games against Michigan State or games against UNC at the end of the season, this Duke team should be able to get to the Final Four and should be one of the very best teams in the country as they were predicted to be. I think that, I guess their tournament, looking back at the tournament, will kind of be a failure if they don't make the Final Four. I expect it. I don't often say that, I think, about Duke teams, even if they are like a 1 seed or a 2 seed. This team is that talented, and they're. I will give Duke fans a little bit of ability or feeling of entitlement for this team because they're that good. And I don't like doing that, but I think that this team is capable of that. So I'm going to consider this tournament for them not to be a success unless they make the Final Four. And honestly, depending on who they face in that Final Four, they need to make the national championship game. Because I think more of the good teams are on the other side of the bracket than on the right side where Duke is. So I thought it was an interesting question because there tend to be different takes about what it means for these teams, especially as you said, Jason, it's a one and done tournament. Anything can happen. And some years Duke overperforms, not often because Duke is often a high seed, but often, sometimes Duke really underperforms and everyone's like, oh, the whole season was a failure. And it's like, well, all those other things like you talked about, there's the great regular season games, there's the early season out of conference tournaments, all that kind of stuff that all leads to our overall impression of the players. Like, Tyler Thornton never made a Final Four, but everyone remembers him hitting a big 3-pointer against Kansas in Maui. Those things matter to us. Those things matter to those guys' legacies. But it is interesting to look at the tournament as kind of the biggest mark on players like Grayson Allen and Marvin Bagley and Wendell Carter, how we remember them years and years down the road.
Okay, folks out there, you've heard us talk about it, and now you can get in on the action too. We have our DBR Bracket Challenge. We've already posted it already on the DBR forums. It is once again set up through Yahoo. The link for that is tinyurl.com/DBR podcast. Now, we've hinted on the forums that there was going to be a special prize. This year, the winner of the DBR Bracket Challenge will receive the opportunity to be on this podcast with us. where you'll get to talk about Duke basketball with us on whatever topic that you choose. Obviously, that's going to occur after the season's over, but you will have a chance to talk with us. So hopefully that encourages you to sign up. tinyurl.com/DBR podcast to register. Of course, we're going to post it again in the forums. Do not delay. Signups end on Thursday, right before the first game. So get your picks in, guys. Today's podcast is brought to you by Jamie Campbell and Tucker Bird, both diehard Duke followers, Duke Class of 78 alums, and the founders of Bird Campbell PA, a Duke-centric business law firm with offices in Dallas, Orlando, and the Gulf Coast. Reach out to them at birdcampbell.com. That's BYRDCAMPBELL.com. And as always, thank you, Bird Campbell, for your support of the DBR podcast. All right, guys, before we wrap up, I guess we should discuss the ACC tournament that happened last week in Brooklyn. The Blue Devils were the 2 seed in the tournament and started out on Thursday playing 10 seed Notre Dame. They eventually won that game fairly handily, 88-70. On Friday night, we played UNC in the semifinals. UNC was the 6th seed, and ultimately, after a completely frustrating game where we tried to catch up at the end, we individually lost that game 73-69. Sam, why don't you start? Give us your brief takeaways of the ACC tournament and our performance.
Well, I'm glad that Duke took care of business against Notre Dame and Bonzie Colson, because the performance against UNC was uneven, to put it mildly. There were a lot of turnovers, and Duke uncharacteristically, I guess, though, maybe not so much because they were playing UNC, but even so, gave up a ton of second chance points. They gave up 18 offensive rebounds, and UNC took 71 shots. I'm going to let Jason go angrier, I guess, on the field goal attempts, because he loves talking about field goal attempts.
Oh my God!
It was a very weird game for the Blue Devils. The one, I guess, thing they can take away that was good is that towards the end of the game, they really locked it down and went on a run and nearly won the game. And then before I give it over to Jason, I guess we have to talk a little bit about this monstrously stupid new Grayson Allen controversy, where apparently he intentionally fouled Garrison Brooks, who was the last guy down the floor during a fast break. I mean, of all the stupid Grayson Allen controversies, this one is the stupidest. And it was sort of a perfect opportunity, because he is kind of like falling over and also like gaining his balance, and Brooks is running behind him, and everybody knows that Allen has this reputation. And then because the refs don't see it real time, because again, it happened really far away from the actual play that was about to end, because the refs didn't call it real time as a foul, they went to the monitor because somebody was down on the ground, and they had to either call no foul, which it wasn't, or they had to call an intentional foul. They can't call a common foul on the review. So they call an intentional foul because I guess that's what they have to do. And somehow the whole sequence leads to Carolina getting the basket that they got during the play and getting 2 foul shots and getting the ball back. And with how close this game was, that you could point to, among a number of other things, as being the one big thing that turned this game in Carolina's favor. And it stinks for Grayson, because of all, like I said, of all of his stupid controversies, I think this one was the one that was sort of the least his fault. It's especially upsetting that the national sports media outlets like ESPN and Sports Illustrated had to just run with the thing like crazy and turn, even the smallest Grayson Allen thing into a whole thing. And I will close by saying, on the Grayson Allen thing, I love his intensity. I love the way he plays the game. I am kind of ready for him to graduate so that we just don't have to deal with this stuff anymore, because it unnecessarily takes away from all of the positives of being a Duke fan and watching this team every week.
Let me, okay, here we go. Look, guys, people out there, world, Grayson Allen, you guys are literally, if you watch the broadcast, all the announcers were like, that's not a foul. That's not even a common foul. Seth Greenberg was adamant that it was not even a common foul, that they shouldn't have even looked at it. But what college basketball fans around the country are trying to insinuate is that Grayson Allen's ass has a mind of its own and has eyes that can somehow pick out a guy behind him and trip him with his ass.
Now,
What we're talking about, guys.
Hold on.
That's what we're talking about.
Hold on. Because I want to be mean to Grayson, but I think Grayson did it intentionally. I don't think it's a foul. I don't think it's that bad a thing.
We all have different takes on this little moment.
I think Grayson. Look on the replay. Your butt doesn't stick out like that unless you intentionally stick it out. I think he was trying to get in the guy's way, which is not a big deal. People do that on picks all the time. People do it during the games constantly. People do little things. They stick out their elbow a little bit more. They lean their shoulder a little bit more. They stick their butt out. It happens. You try and get in the way of the other guys. That's part of gaining an advantage through contact. That's a huge part of basketball.
But there's one key thing that you're forgetting here.
I don't think it's not a foul, but I think Grayson did it intentionally. But it's not a foul.
So my question is this. If you look at the replay, how can he do it intentionally when his eyes are facing forward? He didn't see him.
I don't know if I believe you, Jason. I think I'm in Donald's camp here. I think that the whole thing was unintentional and it just happened that way. And I guess I get calling a foul if you cause somebody else to trip, even if you weren't trying to do that, in the same way that like a moving screen often causes the defender to trip, even though you're not specifically trying to knock him over.
Look, I'll be honest. I haven't watched it like 30,000 times to try and decipher exactly what happened. I saw the replay a couple times, while it was happening real time. I went, well, it looked to me like he did it intentionally. Again, I don't think it's a foul. And the bottom line is it's incredibly stupid because that it's a controversy. It's only a controversy because people think Grayson Allen is like the mad tripper. He's like some supervillain or something like that. It's crazy. It's silly. It's stupid. He gets called for stuff that no one else would get called for. But it's a distraction from the game. And it's a distraction from the fact that Duke did a terrible job of taking care of the ball. They did a terrible job of getting the kind of shots that they wanted. This was a game that Duke should have won. North Carolina is really good, and full credit to the Tar Heels for playing well. And Theo Pinson, thank God Theo Pinson's finally graduating, because I think that guy's turning into one of the best players in the country. I thought Theo Pinson was amazing in this game, even though his stats don't necessarily show it. It felt to me like Theo Pinson controlled the game more than anyone else out there. He was fabulous in this contest. But Sam said it. I want to go back to what matters, which is that Carolina scored 74 points against Duke. Duke allowed Carolina to take 71 shots. 71 shots. That's a ton of shots from the field. Of course they scored 74 points. The new look Duke defense shouldn't allow that kind of thing to happen. And they pierced our zone really well. They killed us on the offensive boards. And as a result, North Carolina won that game. And that's what matters. And as we look to the NCAA tournament, I'm going to look for Duke to be the defensive team and the rebounding team that we were for the previous few weeks, not the team that we were against North Carolina.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it was frustrating in the sense that it seemed like every possession we could do everything wrong, and every possession for UNC they could do no wrong. I mean, Theo Pinson had that one assist where it was saved out of bounds. He was on the ground on his butt in front of underneath the goal, catches the ball, passes it to somebody who lays it in. Like that doesn't happen. Those sort of quirky plays don't happen. But the one thing about it is it seemed like Duke just didn't find their rhythm on offense, and on defense, they were letting UNC have everything at will. And I don't know what they saw on tape that allowed them to kind of have this game plan, but they executed it great, especially in the second half when they started to pull away. I think they let off the gas, which, allowed us to creep back in. And, obviously our guys were not quitting. But I think in the end, UNC they had our number. And it seemed like it was so frustrating to watch because every time we're like, okay, we got to stop, guys. All we got to do is just make a nice decision with the basketball. We would throw the ball away, or we would, take an ill-advised shot, or, somebody would miss a layup. It was one of the more frustrating games to watch. And it just sucks that it was in the ACC tournament where I thought we had a pretty good chance of winning.
Well, and Donald, I'm glad you mentioned the play where Pinson's on the floor and gets that assist, because when the game ended, I said to some friends of mine, I said, you know what, we can be frustrated and angry that we lost this game, but the truth is, the team that played smarter, the team that played harder, the team that got the loose balls, and the team that took care of the ball is the team that won that game. Now, I hate saying that Duke got out-hustled, out-desired, and outsmarted, because those are things that Coach K spends all year teaching our guys to be the team that hustles more, that plays smarter, and executes better. But in this game, that was North Carolina. There's no question about it. And that, that's like I said, Carolina deserved the win. And the frustrating thing to me is that Duke didn't deserve to win.
Man, how much would we love Theo Pinson if he was wearing a Duke uniform?
Oh my God. Yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He'd also be the most hated player in the country.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, guys, we are going to end with Player of the Week nominations. And Jason, you get to go first.
So obviously, we talked mostly about the Tar Heel game, but before that game, Duke had a contest against Notre Dame. And against Notre Dame, Marvin Bagley. Marvin Bagley against Notre Dame went for 33 points and 17 rebounds. 33 points and 17 rebounds. Now, against North Carolina, he had a pedestrian game, 19 points and 13 rebounds. How can we think that 19 points and 13 rebounds is pedestrian? Marvin Bagley is a force of nature. I wrote this on the boards, and I just want to repeat it now for folks on the podcast who maybe didn't read what I wrote on the boards. In the history of Duke basketball, going back, I don't know, 80 years, 100 years? In the history of Duke basketball, there have been 5 times that someone scored 30 points and got 15 rebounds. 30-15. A 30-15 game has only happened 5 times. Elton Brand never did it. Danny Ferry never did it. Carlos Boozer never did it. Mark Allery never did it. Shane Battier never did it. Jabari Parker never did it. Jalil Okafor never did it. I think I've named virtually every great big man in Duke history. Christian Laettner did it 30 and 15. Christian Laettner did it once, but I said there have been 5 times that someone at Duke has gotten a 30-15 game. Christian Laettner did it once. Marvin Bagley has now done it 4 times. Marvin Bagley is unquestionably the greatest freshman in Duke history. He's in the conversation as a freshman for the best single season in Duke history. I think, Danny Ferry's senior year, J.J. Redick's senior year, Shane Battier's senior year, Jason Williams' junior year, maybe.
Elton Brand's sophomore year was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But Bagley's in the conversation along with those guys. Johnny Dawkins' senior year was also pretty great. I don't think we are.
And none of us even remember like Art Heyman or Dick Groat. But yeah, regardless.
Yes. But my bottom line is, if I say to you, Marvin Bagley's season this year is up there with those guys, you're not going to go, you're crazy. You're going to go, yeah, he's in the conversation. So my player of the week is Marvin Bagley for putting up his 4th 30-15 game of the year. It's mind-boggling. And like I said on the boards, we're not really capable at this moment of appreciating what he's doing. In time, we will look back on this. We will understand how blessed we were to have this kid in uniform for us for 1 year. And by the way, I'll talk about all these things about greatest freshman. He reclassified. He's technically a high school senior. Oh my God. Marvin Bagley, player of the week.
Sam, what are you going with?
So I feel bad now that I didn't go with Marvin Bagley, because I don't know that we've ever had such an impassioned discussion of player of the week in the 3+ years on the show. However, I am going with Grayson Allen, who, to use Jason's terminology, had a pedestrian 23 points against Notre Dame on just 10 field goal attempts. So that's pretty damn good. He went 5 for 6 from 3. And then I really had to give it to not a big man because of the performance against UNC and the rebounding. So Grayson Allen, I think among the guards, clearly the most productive in the 2 games. He went 4 for 10 from 3 against North Carolina, which is the only respectable shooting that anybody on the team had. And like I said, couldn't be a big man because of the poor rebounding. But Grayson kind of filled up the stat sheet against UNC. I think played pretty hard, and we know that he's out there trying to win. And also just because, you know what, I'm just trolling everybody out there who thinks that Grayson is the worst. I had somebody this weekend who saw me wearing Duke apparel who yelled at me, Grayson Allen is everything that is wrong with college basketball. And I didn't have the heart to turn around and be like, man, do you know what's going on in college basketball these days? But regardless.
Right.
So in honor of that jerk, Grayson Allen, player of the week.
I'm going to reward mediocrity, and for his mediocre 33 points and 17 boards against Notre Dame, and his mediocre 19 points and 13 boards against USC, I am going with, as Jason called, the greatest Duke freshman ever, Marvin Bagley III. Obviously, I'm joking, guys. It was not mediocre. He was awesome. And that is going to do it for episode 111, episode 111 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Recording note for you guys, we will likely record on Thursday sometime in the evening after Duke's first round game against Iona. So look for our next episode sometime on Friday morning. But for now, thank you all so much for listening. For Sam Klein and Jason Evans, I'm Donald Wine. Duke
wait. Before you sign off, don't forget to sign up for the bracket challenge so that you can be on the show with us.
Yeah.
Because that is really cool. Just a reminder. What's the URL again, Donald?
The URL is tinyurl.com/DBR podcast. That's one word. We will post it in the forums. We've already had it on the forums, but we'll post it in the thread that we have for this podcast. And we will obviously hammer the hell out of you guys to remind you to sign up. But for now, Duke Band, play us a sweet melody. It's March Madness.